In this video, we'll go through the basic operations of Photoshop so that we get used to some of the controls that are there. Now, Photoshop is a huge program, so trying to learn it all in one video or even 100 videos is impossible. So I'll do my best to get us started, at least with some of the most common tools that we need. Now you can see I've opened up a photograph in Photoshop. And let's go through some of those basic things that we might have to do in Photoshop. One of the first things we might have to do is to resize a photograph. You can see over here at the top, this photograph is at 81% zoom. That means if I was to just zoom in a little bit, like so, at about 100% you can see how big the photograph is right there. Now let's say if I wanted the photograph to be half the size. Let's deal with that now. We'll go to Image, we'll go to Image Size. Now we can choose different ways of resizing a photograph. So for example, if I was to choose percent and say, actually, I want this photograph to be 50% as big, half the size, I simply have to type in 50 and make sure the word percent is there. Now, one thing that you may have noticed is, as I change one of the dimensions, the other one changes. So when I change the width, the height changes. This is important because we want our photograph to look the same without getting squashed or stretched. Over here, you can see there's a little chain. If I unclick that, I can now choose different numbers for the width and the height. For this case, I don't want to do that, so I'll switch that back on. We'll go to 50% and we'll press OK. And you can see that my photograph, although it looks really small, you can see I'm only looking at it zoomed out. So let's just zoom into about 100%, and that's how big I wanted my photograph. So that's a really quick way of resizing things. Let me undo that so I've got my original photo back. Another operation that we like to do in Photoshop is cropping, which means we like to choose areas of the photograph we want to keep and throw the rest away. In this case, I'm going to go to the selection tool. I'm going to select the part of the picture I want. So let's say that middle part with the shape in it. I'm going to go to Image and I'm going to choose Crop. And you can see it removes everything that I didn't choose and keeps only what I did choose. So again, that's a really useful thing in Photoshop to do, removing things from a photograph you don't need. And lastly for this video, I thought we'd look at the photographic tools on this side of the window. And when you load a photograph into Photoshop, you automatically get this panel, the adjustments panel. In the adjustments panel is a whole bunch of stuff that we're not going to go through in this video. We'll stick with a simple brightness and contrast. Sometimes you get a photograph that looks dull, so you can move these sliders around until it looks good. I'll put those both back to 0, as I think the photograph looked just fine. We also have a number of other controls that I'm not going to go through, but just for your sake, it might be worth clicking open one and just experimenting and seeing what happens. If something doesn't go as planned, you can always click it away and then Control Z, undo it, just to get rid of anything that might have gone wrong. So that's a very basic introduction into Photoshop with some of the most common and easy tools that you might need for a photograph.